Summer is the season of so many harvests. Yarrow, artemisia, and ginkgo, to name just a few of the herbs available this time of year. Around mid-morning, before the sun is high in the sky, is the ideal time to go out into the garden with a basket and garden scissors. Then the herbs go into the herb dryer in the shade or else are hung up in bundles indoors. But this is only the beginning of the cycle of these herbs. Today, I want to share about a really important aspect of herbalism, and that is the organization of the herbal apothecary. So this is my herbal apothecary that you see behind me. And I wanted to talk about it because growing and harvesting herbs is really only one aspect of the process of herbalism. All the time and energy spent tending to the plants and harvesting the herbs themselves would go to waste if I didn't have a place to store the herbs once they're dried, away from sunlight, rain, wind, and all of the elements that the herbs experience outdoors. Because the main benefit of drying herbs rather than just collecting them fresh as needed is that it allows us to harvest the herbs when they're at the peak of their medicinal properties. So, for example, like lemon balm, I want to harvest the leaves before the plant has gone to flower. Or if I want yarrow flowers, I want to harvest them when they're fresh and new and not all dried up on the plant, for example. Or if I want a root like burdock or echinacea, it's best to harvest in fall when the medicinal properties are concentrated in the roots as the plant is preparing for winter. I'm really lucky to have a corner of my house to dedicate to herbalism, but even if you don't have shelves in the corner like I do, even if you just have a cupboard in the kitchen or even shelves in the kitchen, as long as the area is protected from direct sunlight, that'll work, and that will work really well, in fact, because having the herbs in the kitchen means you'll use them more often. I have this section away from the kitchen because for many years I had a small herbalism business where I would make little packets of herbs, dried herbs, and a few different remedies that I would sell in a store in town. But as I've been focusing more on building our house, I let go of the commercial part of the business. And also, if I'm honest, I haven't been paying as much attention to my apothecary as I used to. And even though my remedies now are just for myself and my household, it's still really important to have a clean space, a hygienic space, and a space that I really enjoy working in because it's beautiful. Instead of spending a few days overhauling the apothecary, it makes more sense for me to spend 15 minutes, a half an hour, but no more than an hour every day working on one aspect of the apothecary. First, starting out by cleaning out the apothecary, getting rid of all the dust and empty jars and herbs that are just too old to really be of any medicinal benefit, and then actually making things with the tinctures and oils that I have ready to go. So I'd like to take you all along in this process of organizing the apothecary, and hopefully that will inspire you to start your own herbal apothecary or get back into the process of incorporating the herbal apothecary into your everyday life. Okay, so let's go. After taking down the jars and wiping the shelves to remove any lingering dust, I began to check the jars that I have filled with herbs over the last year or so, to see which are destined for tea and which need to be composted. Exactly how long dried herbs hold their medicinal properties is debated in the world of herbalism. In general, a dried herb starts to lose its potency after 6 months to a year, if stored in ideal conditions, and even less if not. Personally, I feel that the shelf life depends on the herb in question. Some herbs, like lemon verbena, maintain their aromatic properties for years, while others barely have a scent after just one. Then there's orange peel, which actually strengthens in medicinal and aromatic properties when stored in a jar for more than a year. In general though, herbs that have begun to lose their scent and original color aren't of much benefit and should be composted or used as mulch in the garden. Tinctures, on the other hand, can last much longer than dried herbs. A little while ago, I made a few jars of echinacea tincture and liniment, and now it is time to separate the herbs and the alcohol and store them long term. I have left these jars macerating a bit too long. In general, it is best to filter out the herbs after a month to 40 days. High-proof alcohol has the ability to extract plant medicine and conserve it for years. Echinacea tincture is a well-known preventative medicine, often taken before cold and flu season does its rounds. I use vodka and fresh 3-year-old echinacea roots to make this tincture. I also made a couple of jars of liniment with grain alcohol and those same fresh echinacea roots. It is meant to be used topically, that is to say, on the skin and not ingested. I use this solution diluted with filtered water to clean cuts and other wounds. Once I have filtered out the herbal matter, I put some of the tincture into dropper bottles and the rest into smaller jars where they fit snugly. With a full apothecary, labeling everything is important, as it is close to impossible to tell one brown liquid apart from another. Then it all goes back into the shelf of ready-to-use remedies. On another day, I decided to tackle the bundles of dried herbs hanging under one of the shelves. I had one bundle of yarrow and another of feverfew. Yarrow is one of those herbs with so many different applications that I have a hard time summarizing exactly what yarrow is for in just a sentence or two. This summer, I have been suffering from seasonal allergies and want to harness the anti-inflammatory properties alongside feverfew in a tea mix. Feverfew is great for those of us who tend to have migraines, and I've also heard of people using feverfew for the annoying effects of pollen-related allergies. The leaves of yarrow are also medicinal, but today I want just the flowers of both herbs, so I trimmed off the stems and stored them in a jar. As always, I labeled the jar before storing it away in the apothecary shelf in a section that is meant for small jars ready to be used in tea. A few days later, I wanted a remedy for sunburn and dry skin, so I grabbed the jar of lavender infused oil. Just like with the echinacea tincture, these herbs have been sitting in the jar a bit too long. Ideally, you should infuse herbs in oil no longer than a month, but I am only getting around to filtering these out now. Oh well. With the oil separate from the lavender, I started chopping up beeswax to heat over a double boiler. When the wax had melted, I added in the lavender oil and then distilled water. It would have been better to do this all over a hot plate or outdoors, where it's warmer, because when I introduced the immersion blender, the wax had solidified a bit. I make lotion pretty much like I make salves, except that I add distilled water. This recipe I made up in the moment because my scale was out of batteries, but in the future I recommend going with the recipe I normally use, which is weighed by grams rather than measuring by spoonfuls. That recipe will be in the description of this video if you're curious to try it out. This lotion is calming and relaxing, just like lavender, and great for putting on my hands, arms, neck, and face post-shower after a long day of working outdoors. At this point, a few days had passed since I collected the herbs shown at the beginning of this video, and it was time to retrieve them from the herb dryer. For the sake of filming, this device is set under a tree, but normally it lives in the shade so that the herbs can dry slowly. I checked on the herbs to see if they were indeed dry enough to be stored in jars. They were crunchy to touch and easily crumbled in my hand, a sure sign that they are ready to be stored long term. I live in a relatively humid climate, so herbs definitely need to be kept in hermetically sealed jars so that they don't get moldy or infested with insects. My system is to store large quantities of herbs in these big jars and then keep the smaller jars in a more accessible area. That way, I'm not constantly opening these big jars and exposing my entire stock to the possibility of insect infestation. Also, having a variety of herbs on hand means I will actually use them more often. Sometimes I leave a jar of a specific herb or mix on the kitchen counter to remind myself to make tea with it the following day. This tea of ginkgo leaves can steep in recently boiled water anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour or even overnight. Ginkgo is great for supporting the brain, improving circulation and memory too. Now I am off to enjoy my cup of tea, perhaps while gazing at the side of my newly organized herbal apothecary. Thanks so much for following along in this herbalist vlog, and happy crafting!